Hello, everyone, and welcome to Soul and Story with Sarah and Cindy. I'm Sara R. Turnquist, clean slash Christian historical romance author and speaker, and it feels like it's been forever since we produced one of these, but I think it's only been 2 weeks, yeah? Like not last week, but the week before,
Right. Yeah.
right?
We only skipped 1 week.
All right, it just feels like a long time. At any rate, we're delving into the importance of writing romance without cliches today.
Yes. And I am Cindy Smith, and I'm a newbie author. I just finished my first novel, that I'm in the process of self-editing it. I love to read all about clean historical and contemporary romance. I love all things Jane Austen. I am just very, I just, that's my favorite genre to read. But before we start, I want to take time out and just acknowledge our own Sarah. She just celebrated over the weekend her 10th anniversary as an author. And friend, honestly, your books are some of my favorite, and I'm so proud
Oh,
of what you've accomplished in these last 10 years.
oh, you are so sweet. I really appreciate that. Yes, it was 2015 in July. It was slated, the first book that was published of mine was slated to come out on like July the 2nd, but then it got delayed a week for some reason. I can't remember why, but it was The Lady Bornikova. And it started as a standalone, but those characters kept talking to me. And so I am finishing up book 5 in the series, which will be the final book in the series. And I think, well, I'm playing around with the concept of doing a prequel novella to introduce the series. So, yeah, thanks. My husband is our technical support back there, and he is putting up all of those wonderful things on the screen that you see. But it has really been a wild ride. But all in all, a wonderful, wonderfully fun adventure. One that I wouldn't trade for anything. I truly believe that I'm exactly where God has called me and doing what He has called me to do. And I pray that the readers of my books will find hope, will find faith, will find encouragement, and all of that. But enough about me. Back to the show, which is about me and you talking about things. Anyways, we sat down earlier this month, or maybe it was in June. I can't remember. I think it was
It's
in June.
all kind of running together, friend.
All the time is blurred. That's right. That's how summer goes. When school is out, the time just kind of blends together, right?
It does.
But we sat down at some point in the past and discussed topics that we wanted to broach in the next several months, this coming year. And this one was not at the top of the list. In fact, there was one that you had already marked to be on today, but I was glancing down the list for whatever reason, and I this topic caught my eye, and I just knew that we had to do it this week.
And it's a really good topic. I'm glad you chose this one because it's easy for the cliches to pop up in our writing before we're aware of it. And I I'm finding that as a new writer, I don't want to start out by writing a lot of cliches because if a, if a if a novel has too much cheese, I want to call it cheese, if I may. If it's too cheesy, it's really hard to read.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that there is the cheese and there's the light and fluffy, what I call cotton candy light romance. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. There is something to be said, I think, for escaping into a novel that's just fun and easy to read. There's definitely a market for that. Those Hallmark type novels, and there are plenty of authors who write that way. That is one of the neat things about the romance genre. It is actually the largest and biggest selling of all the genre fiction by far. Like, there's not even a competition. The gap is so huge.
Mhm.
But there are a ton of subgenres within the romance genre. There's fantasy, which is now called romantasy. There's suspense, romantic suspense, contemporary romance, historical romance, horror more than that, beyond that. And then you've also got the main market, the general market, that's what it's called. The general market for each of those genres and subgenres. And then you've got the Christian slash clean market for all of those genres. But basically, if there is a love story at the center of the novel, of the manuscript, it is a romance.
Yeah. Yeah, and how do you avoid these pitfalls? As I said earlier, writing my first novel, it was hard to not want to add all these cliches. So what advice would you give to avoid those?
Yeah, I think it is very easy and very tempting as a writer to write the cliches in the relationship challenges and in the story, because it's easier that way. It's less messy, but it's not life. Granted, there are some people living maybe somewhat of a cliche romance story, but not many of us. For most of us, it's complicated. And a lot of the time, love is challenging. So why would we write anything less? It wouldn't feel authentic. It wouldn't touch the reader. It wouldn't be relatable. And one of my goals as an author is for the reader to see a part of themselves in the story and walk away seeing that there is light in those tough places,
Mm,
even if it doesn't tie up with a nice bow. And I think back to your question about the pitfalls, I think the best way to avoid the pitfalls of cliche is to be vulnerable. I
yeah.
think it was Hemingway that said, "There's nothing to writing. You just sit at the typewriter and bleed." And there is a lot of truth to that. I think it's important to let yourself feel the emotions with your characters, become the character in a lot of ways as you write. And most importantly, let the Holy Spirit write with you. Help let him write the story that he has for you to tell.
Yeah.
And that way it'll be real and authentic.
That's beautiful. I love that, letting the Holy Spirit write have you write his story. I love that
Mhm.
because I think that is where powerful stories come from.
Yeah, and basically the reason I think that we're drawn to romance, and the reason that so many people are writing it and reading it, is that we are all trying to tell the great romance between us and Christ, God the Father. It is a romance at its very core. It's a love story.
Mhm.
And so there are pieces of us that are trying to retell that, trying to capture that, trying to feel that, trying to embrace that in some very real way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Having a believable romance story is just such a joy to read. And in your last novel, Annie, the Engineer's Daughter, which I loved, and even when I was auditing, I was still drawn in, and I knew what was going to happen. That the relationship between Annie and Micah is so compelling. It's messy,
Mm.
it's complicated, and it's sweet. It felt like watching two people in real life. Um, I have read other books, a lot of Jane Austen variations, where they keep, when you go into reading a variation of Pride and Prejudice, you kind of expect Darcy to be Darcy, and you expect Elizabeth to be Elizabeth. And I remember I'm going to say trying to read a variation where Darcy was gregarious and excited and friendly. And I'm like, okay, I can't read this. And it had a lot of cliches in it, a lot of cliches. And so I had to put the book down because I couldn't read it just because of how, first of all, how Darcy was so undarcy like, and then just the cliches.
Yeah, that sounds really, really strange. But I thank you, of course, for your kind words about Annie and Micah. Sometimes I do struggle with the writing because it gets messy and challenging. But working the characters' way through their circumstances to their happily ever after makes it worthwhile. I definitely want to bring the reader a satisfying ending of the story for their sake and for mine. If the books were all doom and gloom, no one would buy them. If we want it to echo real life, but not be real life in a sense that it just doesn't ever come out in the wash, if you will. because certainly no one would buy a second book from that kind of author, unless that's what they're looking for.
Right.
So I want to make the relationship challenges feel real and authentic, but not so dark that there's no realistic way to come out of it,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And I agree with you. And I talk about loving Jane Austen, and I watched the movie Becoming Jane. And there is a scene where Jane and her sister are talking, and Cassandra's like, well, what's going to happen in the story? And I love this quote. I had to look it up because I wanted to get it right. Um, Jane Austen says, my characters shall have, after a little trouble, all that they desire. And I like that. That's kind of like what you like about a book. You like to see them overcoming obstacles and challenges, and to see them not necessarily have that happily ever after, but to end up working through those challenges
Mhm.
and coming together. Because that's what we do in real life. We work through challenges in our marriages and relationships, not
Mhm.
just not just marriages, but even friendships. We work through challenges and we come out on the other side stronger.
Yeah. In the romance genre, they say that it may not be happily ever after, but at least it needs to be happily for now.
Yeah.
Because the other thing about the romance genre is if the couple does not experience a happily ever after or a happily for now, you actually haven't written a romance. You've written more like a women's fiction with romantic elements.
Mm.
So again, the pieces of romance is the love story has to be central to the story, and they have to have a happily ever after, and you need two complete character arcs to be a romance. So those are the main pieces of the romance. Uh, what makes it a romance in that genre. But it's interesting to me. I while we were preparing for today, I thought about how the ancient Greek and Roman plays often utilized a literary device called ex machina. It basically means God in the machine. They would write characters into these just horrible situations. If y'all have ever read Greek plays or seen Greek plays, you know what I'm talking about. These just terrible situations that they either didn't want to or couldn't write their way out of. So the gods would just show up and come down and fix it all the way that they wanted it to be in the end. And while I want to write hope in God and the reality that He can and does weave stories together, I don't want it to be so convenient in that way that it was like the characters didn't have to work their way to their ending. Make sense?
It does. It totally does. And it's interesting. We in the West are how we like romance to play out.
Mhm.
And I had the opportunity to live in China for 3 years, and I was learning the language. I have forgotten most of it, um, and the my teacher suggested that I watch some Chinese movies. She gave me a list of what she would recommend that I watch, just so that I could get a feel for how the language is spoken. And I had the captions on so that I knew what was going on in the movie. Um, and she said, I'll also understand the culture. It'll give me an idea of what the culture is like. And I noticed that it was like the characters had a lot of angst. They had a lot of challenges, and it never really resolved. The challenges never in the two movies that I watched, because they weren't my cup of tea, so I stopped. But they just never resolved in a satisfying way. And I don't know if that's a cultural thing, or maybe that was just her choice in entertainment. But I found it very unsatisfying that through all the angst and through all the challenges, that nothing was resolved.
Mm, that sounds almost melodramatic in a way. But if that's what the audiences crave, that is what will be produced.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a whole nother episode, I think, to talk about how the art and production will match up with what the audience wants. Either it'll stimulate nuance in the audience, or the audience wants will bring about the creation of that kind of art. But I think the world right now is hungry for real,
Yeah.
hungry for authentic, and hungry for vulnerability from artists, because there's some common things, that common experiences to humanity and common struggles. And so I think that readers and moviegoers and all kinds of consumers, they want to experience emotion themselves in the art that they consume, and maybe a catharsis at some point.
Mm.
So, as we talk about cliches, I want to be careful here to make it clear that we're not just talking about cliche wording, like, idioms and things like that, which is important to steer clear of in the specific subgenres that you're in. I am sorry, I have lost my screen. There we go. But also, it's important to be careful about cliche characters.
Mhm.
So, take for example the jilted ex-girlfriend. That is a personality in reality in a relationship. Is that there is past relationships in those individuals. But I would be careful as you're writing about falling into that whole cliche. Give that character unique idiosyncrasies that set them apart and make him or her interesting.
Mhm.
And while all romance writers, whether they intend to or not, utilize tropes, there's a difference between embracing a trope while making it your own and writing a cliche version of the trope. And again, I just encourage my writer friends to be different. Bring your own take on that genre, bring your author voice into that story, and let the reader see you even in the trope as much as you possibly can.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up tropes because can they can really enhance a book. They really can.
Hmm.
And I do think about the Hallmark movies that you talked about earlier. I mean, there seems to be certain tropes that play out, but we go back time and time again because I think we're comfortable with the tropes. We can relax, we can enjoy the story. We know how it's going to end, but yet we're interested to see how the story progresses, even though it's something we're familiar with.
Hmm.
Um, I know for me, I tend to be drawn to books where the female heroine feels that maybe she's not worthy or she's
Hmm.
not, what's the word I'm looking for? She doesn't feel like she deserves the happy ending. They're for everybody else but for her. And then she learns through, especially in Christian books, she learns that her value is in the Lord, and then she's able to have a good relationship with the hero. I like that
Hmm.
trope. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, and I think that the things that we write as artists and the things that we enjoy reading as consumers speaks to a piece of us that we're struggling with. We want to see how other characters work it out so that we can find some truth there for our own soul, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah,
And I also think, especially as writers, the tropes that we're drawn to are ways that we are working out our salvation with fear and trembling,
100%.
as we follow these characters through their journey. I know that all my characters have a piece of me in them, and so a piece of their struggle is is reflected by either something I'm struggling with, or something I've struggled through, or something that I will struggle through whether I realize it or not. So it's just very interesting how the characters and their journey reflects the artist in so many ways. Not in every way, but in so many ways. But I think, in short, it's important to keep it real, be authentic, and keep it real interesting by staying away from some of those cliche things. But why don't we, just for fun, have anyone who's listening now or later, why don't you comment with your favorite tropes? Tropes are things like best friend's brother, enemies to lovers, marriage of convenience, billionaire romance.
Mhm.
All of those are different types of tropes. If you're not familiar with tropes, I encourage you to do a quick Google search for romance tropes and just look at a list and see if there's one that you're particularly drawn to as a writer or a reader or
Yeah,
both.
absolutely. Absolutely. I love that idea. I would love to hear what our viewers think about tropes and what their favorite one is. Going back to Jane
Mhm.
Austen, of her books, I know Pride and Prejudice is probably one of her most popular ones, but my favorite is Persuasion, because Anne Elliot
Mm.
does not feel like, her family makes her feel like she's not pretty, she's not interesting, she's just there to kind of take care of everybody else. But she ends up finding that she does have value, and she does end up with Captain Wentworth at the end. Don't mean to get, I
Don't
don't want to
spoil it. Don't
spoiler. Okay,
spoil it.
right.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, it goes back to, like, they will have troubles, but then they will get what they desire at the end. So please
Mhm.
do let us know, either on Facebook or in the comment section on YouTube. We would just love to know what your favorite tropes, I said troops, tropes are. So join us again next time. We'll be talking about more things that we find important. And we are just so thankful to have you guys joining us and listening in, even if it's later, even if you're not joining the live stream and you listen later. We love having you be here with us as we talk, because we like to do that. We like to talk to each other. But
Might
we are
as well have you along for the journey.
exactly 100%. So anyway, everyone, have a blessed day, and we're excited that you were here this morning. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This episode is over, but your writing journey continues. Visit saraturnquist.com to find links to help you achieve your writing dream.